Welcome to the Baker and Taylor Summer Reading Middle Grade Author Panel. My name is Deanna Gerard, and I'm the Children's and Teen Sales Support Manager at Baker and Taylor, as well as a children's librarian. It's my pleasure today to welcome you all to our live author event. As part of our yearly prize book program, where we offer discounted titles for giveaway books, we're also hosting live author events throughout the month of June. Today, we are so grateful and very excited to have three amazing award-winning middle grade authors with us, and all have titles on the Summer Reading Prize list. First up, Jasmine Warga is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of middle grade novels Other Words for Home, The Shape of Thunder, and A Rover's Story. Other Words for Home earned multiple awards, including a John Newbery Honor, a Walter Honor for young readers, and a Charlotte Huck Honor. The Shape of Thunder was a school library journal and Bank Street Best Book Award and has been named to several state award reading lists. A Rover's Story, her latest novel, was an instant New York Times bestseller, an Indie Next list, and Junior Library Guild selection, and was named Best Book of the Year by Publishers Weekly and the Washington Post. Originally from Cincinnati, she now lives in the Chicago area with her family in a house filled with books. Welcome, Jasmine. Next up, we have Lisa Fipps. With her debut middle grade novel, Starfish, Lisa Fipps won 13 awards, including the 2022 Michael L. Prince Honor Book Award, and the novel in verse was selected for 45 state award reading lists. Her second novel in verse, And Then Boom, was just published in May 2024. Starfish has been translated into Turkish, Korean, Spanish, Chinese, and will soon be coming out in 4 other languages. Lisa is also an award-winning former journalist and an award-winning former library marketing director. She currently lives in Indiana and has lived in Texas. Lisa loves pugs and keeps a list of how many different ways her name can be misspelled. Her current tally is 34. Welcome, Lisa. And we also have Tay Keller. Tay is the Newbery Award-winning and New York Times bestselling author of When You Trap a Tiger, The Science of Breakable Things, and Jennifer Chan Is Not Alone. She grew up in Honolulu, Hawaii, where she subsisted on kimchi, purple rice, and stories. Now she writes about biracial girls trying to find their voices and lives in Seattle with her husband and a multitude of books. And we're also very excited about our guest moderator, Anna Taylor, who brings diverse experience from public libraries, bookstores, and theater. By day, she works at Unum. By night, she freelances in the library world. Anna served on the 2022 Caldecott Committee, YALSA's Quick Picks, and many ALA committees. Based in Chattanooga, Tennessee, she champions social justice and LGBTQ rights, performs locally, and sits on the Chattanooga Public Library Board. So, without any further ado, take it away, Anna.
Well, hi, I'm Tay. First of all, I'm really excited to be on a panel with you both because Jasmine is one of my very good friends and one of my favorite authors. And Lisa, we haven't met, but I love Starfish so much. So I'm really excited to talk with you both. I'll talk a little bit just about Jennifer Chan Is Not Alone. So this is a book about a girl who goes missing, a girl named Jennifer Chan, and the only people who might be able to find her are the girls who bullied her. So it's a story about bullying, aliens, redemption, about asking these really big questions about, the universe and if we're alone in it, about what else is out there, and also what else is in here in our hearts. So it was really exciting to write. I based it off of my own experience in middle school a little bit, and I learned a lot about space and aliens in order to write it. So that is Jennifer Chan Is Not Alone.
I love that book, and as Tay knows, because I wrote her an email immediately after finishing it, telling her it's a book I feel like I needed when I was in 7th grade. And I super love that book and also feel very excited to be on this panel with both of you. I'm going to kind of split my time in the books that I introduce because I will talk about my most recently published book, which is A Rover Story, which is a book about a Mars rover. The Mars rover in the book, his name is Resilience, and he's loosely based off of Perseverance, the actual rover that is on Mars. And I was inspired to want to write the book after watching the rover launch. But the book follows Resilience from his creation in the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory all the way through his dangerous journey to Mars. And while it is, I hope, a fun space adventure that will make kids curious about the universe and our place in it, it also to me is actually really a book about what does it mean to feel things and what does it mean to feel things deeply, because as Resilience comes online and starts to learn more about his mission, he starts to realize he's also learning human emotions and wonders about them and what this means. And so it's a book kind of about, what does it mean to be a friend? What does it mean to love somebody else? What does it mean to care about them? And then I have a new book that I'm really excited about that is coming out this fall. And it's called A Strange Thing Happened in Cherry Hall. And it is the first mystery novel that I have ever written. It's a book that takes place at an art museum. And the premise is that a painting has been stolen from this art museum. But the painting that's been stolen is not a particularly famous painting. No one really understands why anyone would go to all the trouble to break into the museum to just steal this one painting. And the book opens when our main character, Rami, is visiting the museum because his mom works there. And in the hallway of the museum, he sees a girl who looks exactly like the girl who's depicted in the missing painting. And the question is, who is she and why can only he see her? And she literally does not know who she is. And so the book unfolds from Rami's perspective, but there's also sort of a mystery narrator perspective that gives us some more information about the painting and who created it and who this girl might be. And then my favorite perspective in the book is actually that of Agatha, who is the turtle who lives in the garden behind the museum. And she knows a lot about who stole the painting, but can't quite get the humans in the book to pay attention. But I think to me, while I hope it's a fun mystery. I loved to read mysteries as a kid. I think it's also sort of a novel about the fact that kind of growing up is a mystery, like coming of age is a mystery. Who am I? Rami, he's almost as confused about that question as the girl who he meets in the museum is, who doesn't even know her name. So, yeah, I'm really excited about it. And that comes out in September.
I'm going to take
Lisa?
a quick talk and then throw it back to Anna now that we've got her back. I'm the author of Starfish, and Starfish is a book about a girl who's bullied relentlessly because she's fat. And I use the word fat because I see it as an adjective like brunette or blonde or whatever, tall, short. I only see it as a problem if you add connotation to it. But anyway, so I wrote that book because I was bullied relentlessly at home, at school, anywhere, everywhere when I was a kid. And I grew up an avid reader. I lived in the library and I never found a book on those shelves about a girl like me. And so I had always dreamt of being an author, but I turned into journalism first because they said I had to learn how to write to be able to be an author. Worst career advice ever. I should have just started writing. But anyway, so I was a journalist for years. And when I decided to start my career of writing, I thought, well, what book would be my first? Because, if your first book isn't successful, you often don't get a chance to have a second book. So I was like, if I only have one chance to write a book, what book am I going to write? And I thought, I'm going to write the book that I needed as a kid. And so I looked around and it still didn't exist. And I'm like, how have we gone all these years without a book about being bullied for your size that really shows you how to handle it? And then my newest book is And Then Boom. And it came out in June, the 1st of June. And it's about a boy named Joe who has to deal with one bad thing after another. And, we've all lived, right, in life. And it just seems like sometimes you get hit with one thing, you lose a job, you get a bad healthcare diagnosis, a relationship blows up, there's family turmoil, there's a bad tornado, there's an earthquake, there's a flood, and it's just one thing after another. And how do you survive the and then booms of life? Especially when you're dealing with poverty, being unhoused, having to live with your grandmother, having an unreliable parent, not knowing one of your parents, who they even are, and things like that. But I'm gonna turn it over to Anna, because I don't like being the MC. I want you to take charge of that. So.
Well, thank you, Lisa. My computer was so excited to hear about all these titles that it just restarted. So I just love hearing about everyone's works and what they've had come out and what's coming out, and I really appreciate all of that. Hello, everyone. My name is Anne. I'll be your moderator today, and we're going to segue into more of a writing question. So, authors. Can you tell me exactly why you like writing for this specific age group? Middle grade is a very niche area. So what draws you to write for this specific age? And let's hop in with let's go to Jasmine first for this one.
Yeah, so I figured out that I wanted to write for this age group when I was teaching sixth grade. It had never occurred to me up until that point to consider writing for kids. I wanted to be an author, and that was my big dream. But I had this, I guess, sense of being the type of author who had short stories in the Paris Review or something, but I was never writing anything. I couldn't quite figure out what story I had to tell. And then from picking books aloud to read to my students, I remembered being 10 and 11 and 12, and how hard those years have been for me. Middle school was really, really tough for me, and I never needed books more than when I was that age. And I feel like there's very few moments in life that cliche of a light bulb moment really applies, but for me, that really applies here. I just had this moment of being like, these are the stories that I have to tell, and these are the stories that I want to tell. And I love writing for this age group so much because I feel like so many awesome things coexist with this age group of where, while they are willing to go with you on a journey where your main character is a Mars rover, but they're also willing to want to have really hard questions about the world and are coming of age and have these really sort of serious questions. So I feel like it's such this great meeting of imagination and introspection.
That's great. I love that. I feel like I would have loved to read your titles as a kid, and it's also just lovely to read as an adult too. What about you, T?
Yeah, I guess kind of similar to what Jasmine said and about what you said about the mystery of coming of age and how so much is uncertain and unknown. And it's like this space that exists between childhood and adolescence. You don't know quite where you fit in there. And so everything feels really fresh and new. And there's so much emotion to work with there. But I also didn't think right away that I was going to be writing middle grade. I started out writing a lot of different YA stories, which in hindsight were just like fan fiction of the Hunger Games. And they weren't original, and they weren't really the stories that I wanted to tell. And there was just one point when I was back home visiting my parents. I was cleaning out all of my middle school stuff, and I found my old middle school notebooks, and I found a science notebook that I had written, and I started just writing a short story about a girl in her science class. And it was like, oh, this is the voice. This is what I've been looking for. And I was able to tap into this version of myself that was really honest and really worried about what came next, and was just vulnerable.
I love that, Tay. And I feel like that's really similar to kind of what Lisa was talking about when she was introducing her book. And so, Lisa, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how your writing and your experience growing up made you write for this audience.
Well, growing up, I come from a very dysfunctional, non-safe home. And so books were my escape. It allowed me to get the heck out of there. When I was reading, I was in Paris. I was on the plains. I was, in Florida. I was on another planet. And I was able to escape my reality and go to a better, safer spot. And I've written a lot over my career. I've written everything from covering President Clinton's trip to Appalachia to reviewing automobiles and writing about them and writing a story about square dancing llamas, covering the Texas Supreme Court. So it's this wild array of audiences and topics that I've covered in my lifetime. But I keep getting drawn back to middle grade because, I'm an avid reader, and on my bookshelves and on my e-reader, you will find nonfiction, fiction, adult, young adult, picture books, etc. But when I sit down to read and I really want a quality book, I still turn to middle grade, because I think that at that age, kids do not give you any leeway to be inauthentic. And I tend to be a very authentic person by nature, having, had to mask for years and deal with things. So I'm very authentic. I mean, who you see is who you get. And I love that challenge of reading to kids who aren't going to let you get away with crap. If you're not writing well, they're going to they have no qualms about it. They pitch the book, they're going to throw it over their shoulder. And at the same time, they are like clay. They are moldable. So if you can get them and tell them, hey, you're worthwhile. You don't have to change to be okay. You don't have to fix you. There's nothing broken about you. If you can get to them and say, it's okay to hurt. It's okay to have pain. It's okay to tell what's going on in your life. So you've got all these opportunities to help them become these amazing adults and humans, and get to them at an age where it settles in their head before, they get to a point where they're not listening and they are struggling, and it just gives you a chance to reach them while they're still reachable.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm hearing a lot of you all writing for this age because maybe it was something that you wanted when you were a kid. You're seeing a lot of yourself reflected in these works. So it also is very interesting because a lot of you are writing a realistic fiction, but then we have rovers and a wide range of plots. So when you're wanting to write for this audience, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Is it the plot? Is it the characters? Is it just a random object? What is your spark, your imagination spark? And we'll have Tay go first.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I love Lisa's answer. I love getting this question on panels and then listening to everyone else's answers because it makes me feel so inspired to write middle grade. So thank you for that. For process question, I wish that I had a process that I could share that works for every book. But it's really different depending on the book that I'm writing. And sometimes it starts with a big question, like what else is out there in the universe? Sometimes it starts with character. The book that I'm working on right now kind of started with 3 different characters and how they're all reacting to one event. But mostly I have these little scraps of an idea that I pull from my real life, things that I'm excited about, things that I really want to know. And I feel like I'm like gathering little ideas like a little bird and like building this bird nest of a story slowly but surely in these little notebooks. And it's just kind of gathering things that excite me until there's some kind of plot to work with there.
Almost kind of like a scrapbook. It's coming in my head that it's all coming together that way. I love that. Lisa, what about you?
Well, mine is a little hybrid-esque in that, I heard once, I think it was in a movie, that journalism is literature in a hurry. And so I was a journalist for 19 years. And so I don't plot. I am not a plotter. I try. I aspire. I tell myself as I'm falling asleep, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm going to plot this book. And then I start writing. I'm like, I'm character driven. And I think why is because, when I was little and reading, I read Isaac Asimov. I read Laura Ingalls Wilder. I read the whole gamut of what was available at my age. And as long as I liked the character, I would go on the plot journey with the writer. So to me, if it's character based, because whether it's Ellie and learning to find her own place, or whether it's Joe trying to figure out how to just survive the world, and deal with all of these and then booms. And my third book, which I'm writing now, won't talk about what it's about, but like what the journey that she's on is that's what carries me as a reader through a plot, is the character. So I develop the character first before I ever start the plotting. And it's sort of like when I was a journalist and I would interview, say you, right? I get to know you, and then I know the plot of the article. If I don't know, in my mind, if I don't know you, I have no idea what the story truly is. And so that's sort of my method. And then I tend to live with characters for a long time before I ever write a word. So for example, And Then Boom, that book was in my head for almost 19 years before I wrote it, because I get to know the characters until I know them beyond a shadow of a doubt. If I'm in the mall, I'm going to pick out what they could buy. I know like what they would laugh at, and they're like, they live with me. And so that's it's character, then plot for mine. Yeah.
I think a lot of us will agree when we say that we really feel that when we're reading your books too. We really feel like we know these characters. So I love hearing about that process. Jasmine, how are you getting started in all of this?
Yeah, I really relate to the bird's nest idea. I also am a collector. I think that for me, usually it starts with an image for all of my books, and that image gives me a question, and I'm always sort of chasing that question. So sometimes it's obvious where the image came from, like with a Rover story, and other times I don't know why a certain image pops into my head. Like with Other Words for Home, I saw an image of a young girl on stage, and I knew that she was new to America, and I was wondering about her and wondering who she was. And with this new book, I saw the girl in the museum hallway who didn't know who she was and was wondering what's going on. Who is this? And then I sort of chased that. And so it's hard for me sometimes to separate out like character from plot. I always think my weakness as a writer is plot, because I'm more interested in character. But the longer I do this, the more I realize I really don't like separate them so much. I'm always trying to like think about sort of what's going to sort of happen to my character, and that is plot, but I think about it in that way, I guess. So but all of my books, I don't know why the ideas came or the images did, but that I would say is the only thing that kind of unifies them, is it's always an image. And I think that that's how I feel about writing, is that I'm always trying to get this image in my head onto the page to hopefully share with the reader, and I'm sort of chasing that first image to see what else I can build.
That's so exciting. I love to hear how all of your minds are working with the process side of it. But now we're going to talk a little bit about writing. And there's two parts to this question, so you can answer both or just one. But how do you write? What's your writing process? Are you someone who writes on a digital laptop? Or are you a pen and paper kind of person? And how did you get started in writing? And we'll have Lisa start us off with this one.
So in addition to reading all the time when I was little to escape my home and my life, I wrote. And so my first book I will share with you. It's really not Starfish. It's trying to reach for it without falling. It's the rabbit that did not know how to jump. It is definitely going to be a New York Times bestseller one day. No, it's never going to see the light of day. But I used to write all the time. So it started when I was little, and because I used to escape to my backyard. There was a Rose of Sharon tree that I used to sit under, and then it got cut down. And so then I snuggled up to the forsythia bush and it got cut down. And then I snuck to my neighbor's Pine Grove and I would hang out there. So, but I would write and I would read and I would read and I would write. And so, but when I became a journalist, you know, you don't have time to like really think through the story. My process was I would go and do the interview, and then on the way back to the newsroom to write it, I would go, okay, here's my beginning, here's my end. I'm good. Because if I have those two, I can figure out the middle through my notes. And then I would go and I would sit down and I would just cold write. And so as an author, I cold write all the time. And since I used to write 8 to 10 hours a day for a living for 19 years, when I write in very long stretches of time. The other day, I think I wrote 12 hours. And that's typical for me when I'm in writing mode. But again, I did that for 19 years. You know what I mean? And some people don't do that. And I always let the character decide if I'm writing in verse or prose. I do write in prose. No one's seen that part of me yet, but I do that. But I really just write the poem that comes to me. And I don't worry about what order the poems are in. I order them later. So I could have the first poem I could write could be something that's smack dab in the middle, or it could be the ending, or, you know, or somewhere in between. And then as I'm starting to plot, I just keep moving them around, cut, paste, cut, paste, cut, paste. And that's sort of what I did as a writer and editor for years was, okay, sorry, kid, you got this over here, you need it here, because I train journalists all the time. So I was like, nope, you're going to move this here. You're going to move this. This is your beginning. This is your end. You don't need this. You're just dumping your notebook here. And I do the same to myself. And so, but I do keep thoughts and ideas in writing in journals. I buy a journal for I'm a journal addict. I buy a journal for every idea for a book that I have. And then I throw ideas there and like just simple things, just so I won't forget them later. But I'm a cold writer on a laptop.
When you're saying that, I just picture that meme of that person who has different papers all over the bulletin board and like putting string and arrows of where all the poems go. So I love
Carrie Ann
hearing that
Holt
that's
does
your
that.
process.
Carrie Ann like
Oh,
puts it
okay.
all over her kitchen and her dining room, and then she goes, "This poem goes here," because she needs but I can see it just on the computer. She needs more of a visual to cut and paste.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
I appreciate the dedication, especially the 12-hour days. Jasmine, what about you?
Yeah, so I'm pretty boring. I mostly write on my laptop. I wish I was someone who wrote longhand. I love when I see authors like post that they did their drafts that way, but I think I'm too impatient. Like I'm a slow physical writer and I have really messy handwriting, and so that wouldn't really work out for me. But I do love writing long form for journaling. I do a lot of journaling. I make word lists, I draw, and trying to like sort out, like map out what I feel like the scene is going to look like. And so that's a part of the process. And in terms of how I guess I got started writing, I decided that I wanted to be an author in first grade because that's when I learned that such a job existed. Up until that point in my life, it had never really occurred to me that there was a job where you got to create stories and make up books. And we did like a writer's night, author's night project in first grade. And it made such an impression on me. I was a super shy kid and I didn't ever like, being in front of people or talking, raising my hand, but I loved the experience of creating my story and then sharing it. And I realized that this was how I felt comfortable sort of sharing. And I held on to that. But I think sort of in like, daughter of immigrant cliche, my parents really wanted me to be a doctor. So for a long time, I said I was going to be like a doctor and a writer. I remember for sixth grade career day, I wore like a white doctor's lab coat and had a notebook. So it took me a while to really believe that I could be a writer. Like when I was a kid, I never had like an author visit, which is why I love doing them now and sort of getting to show kids that anybody can be a writer and that everybody has a story. But that was something I definitely didn't understand when I was young. So it took me a long time to really like believe that this could be something I could do. But I think I was like in love with the idea of being a writer more than I was actually writing a lot as a kid. I was definitely a reader, but I think reading is such an apprenticeship to writing. And so I think that's really what I spent my childhood doing, was reading and inhaling as many stories as possible. So when the time came, I was sort of ready, to start writing.
I'm sure you would have been a wonderful doctor, but I'm so glad that you became an author, so we have your lovely stories. Tay, what about you? I'd love to hear yours as well.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Lisa, the rabbit that didn't know how to jump sounds like a picture book. Just saying. It could be.
It is so bad.
So my process, I guess, is once I've collected a semblance of a bird's nest, I kind of drag myself through a first draft. And this is not my favorite part of the process. Just sitting down, facing a blank page, getting words out. It's really like I have to force myself to do this part. But once I have a first draft, which is super messy and will never see the light of day, but once it exists, then I have something to work with. And that for me is when it starts to get fun. I go through so many revisions, like I've done 20 revisions for most of my books. And it's very much like that meme that you were talking about. I print out my drafts, I move stuff around, I write all over it. And I'm just trying to find the story in the mess, find the heart of it, the journey for the characters. And that's the part I really love doing. And as for how I got here, how I started writing, my mom is a writer. So I grew up from the time I can remember watching her write. And that was so incredibly lucky for me, because not only did I know that that was a job, that being an author was a thing that someone could do, but my mom did it. And so my parents also knew that it was a thing that people could do. And so they were able to support me and to show me that, yes, if I wanted to do this, I could work for it, and my mom could help me kind of see a path. And I always think that that's such an important part of my story to share, because so much of writing and becoming a writer is hard work. And we always hear about the hard work part of success, but a lot of it can be luck too. And for me, certainly, there was so much privilege in that upbringing. But that's why, like Jasmine said, author visits are so important for me, to be able to go into schools, to see students, to show them that it is a thing that they can do. And especially honestly, as a woman, that it is a thing they can do. I've gone to school visits with like male booksellers who are there to help me sell books. And I've had kids walk up and look at him and be like, "Oh, are you the author?" And, to be like, to redirect and be like, "Actually, it's me." And to be able to be a representative, to show girls that their stories can matter too, and that they're able to do this. I feel like that's such a lucky thing that I'm able to do that now as part of my job.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting when you said that, how your parents were writers too, because, you know, our next question before we go to questions from the audience is, where are you finding inspiration in authors? Do you have favorite authors from when you were growing up, or now are you looking at certain works that maybe had inspired you, or what is something that brings you joy in reading now as well? And we'll start with Jasmine with this one.
Awesome. Well, to start, I love the work of both of my fellow panelists here, Lisa and Tay's books. Both really inspire me, and I feel like they're writing some of the best middle grade books in the game right now. I also am a huge fan of everything Erin and Trada Kelly write. She's one of my favorite writers working today. I feel like she really plays with perspective really in an interesting way, and all of her books just feel so like sharp and crisp to me. Rebecca Stead was one of the first middle grade writers who I encountered outside of being in that demographic. So like I have my favorites from when I was a kid, like Lois Lowry and E.L. Cunningsburg and Catherine Patterson. And then returning, all those years later when I was a teacher and looking for read alouds and reading When You Reach Me with my class and just being blown away by that book. And I feel the same way about Jacqueline Woodson's work. I love all of her books, and that really inspired me to make me want to write middle grade. And so those were some of my favorites. I could go on and on, but I want to leave space for Lisa and Tay, who I'm sure have other favorites to shout out to. So
Such amazing authors. I'm just like banger, 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 banger after every single one you say. What about you, Tay?
Yes, agreed, co-signing everything that Jasmine said. When I was younger, one of my favorite books was Holes by Louis Sacker. And it's fun when I say that in school visits and kids get really excited because they're still reading that. And another one of my favorite books was Millicent Man Girl Genius by Lisa Yee. That was the first time I read a book for my age, for middle schoolers, that had an Asian protagonist. So I got to see that part of my identity represented. And I loved that book. I thought it was so funny. I had a special spot on my bookshelf. And I tell this story sometimes, but my first author event that I ever did, I was at this dinner with a bunch of authors. I was this newbie. I don't think my book had even come out yet. It was coming out in a couple of months. So I was really nervous. And Lisa Yee was sitting at the other end of this author table. And I couldn't even think the whole dinner. I was just like in my head, like, oh my God, it's Lisa Yee. What do I do? And I was just like planning in my head the whole dinner. I was like, okay, I'm going to go up to her. I'm going to be really normal and introduce myself and professionally be like, hi, my name is Tay. I'm an author now. Your books inspired me. And I ended up just walking up to her and like just be like, you're Lisa Yee. I love you so much. And it was so mortifying, but she of course was so nice about it. And it's just so cool now to know her, to be one of her peers, and just to be working with such incredible writers now. I feel honestly like constantly starstruck.
That is so relatable. And it's so funny because I think most authors like don't get recognized in the wild because they're just like their book gets recognized, but not them. But when I met Lainey Taylor, I reacted the same way. So you were not alone in the fangirl moment. Lisa, I'd love to hear about yours as well.
Well, I was the youngest in my family by quite a stretch. So I remember reading books that are a little older. Plus, I am, I think, older than the other authors on this panel. But Paula Danziger was a great author, and she had a way to get hilarious humor in and yet make these very poignant moments. And then, Gary Schmidt does the same thing. And you're like, you're reading this book and you're laughing, and all of a sudden you realize, whoa, he just taught me about life. How did he do that? And I love that masterful kind of work like that. And I think of like Kimberly Brubaker Bradley, obviously my fellow authors on this panel. But it's what's interesting to me is when you read a book and you can't stop thinking about it, like a year later, you're thinking about Fighting Words, or 2 years later, you're thinking about Okay for Now, or, and you read that and you're like, dang, that's like skill, you know what I mean? And I'm always challenging myself, okay, because I don't know how others do, but once I wrote Starfish, like it was out for a year before I read it. I was like, if I see something in there I don't like, it's going to crush me. And so, like 18 months after it came out, I was like, well, I guess I should read it now, because it's been Bennett. And I was like, okay, there were a few things I would change, but nothing like soul crushing. But it's like when a character lives with you, when a character from another book lives with you, that's like that's like the piece de resistance, because it's like you've created this fictional character that is somehow so important to me that I can be driving down the road and think about them or think about how they would respond to something. And I think any author who can do that just grabs my heart. And there's so many of them. And it's just amazing though when you're in that moment and they just crush you, or they make you laugh, or they make you think, and you're like, whoa, that's powerful stuff. And that's what I live for, to read and to write.
This was such an amazing conversation. I feel like I learned so much about everyone as a writer and as a kid, and even saw a first published book by someone on this panel. And I wanted to see if we had any questions from the audience before we wrap up. So if you have a question that you would like to ask our panelists, please put them in the Q&A. Okay, it looks like we have a couple of them. So let's go with, oh, there's so many good ones. Okay, well, let's do one that I feel like a lot of people usually ask, so they'd like an answer to, which is any advice for our writers to be who may be watching? Let's have Tay take this one first.
Yeah, so the advice that I always give is a little bit cheesy, but I really genuinely mean it, which is to have fun with it, because I think that it's so easy to ask the internet for advice and then just get like a million different ways to write a book and to get in your head about it and to feel like, maybe I'm doing this wrong. Is this the right way? Is this the right way? And really, there is no right way to do it. And so I think that the best thing to do is lean into the thing about writing that is really exciting for you, whether that's characters or plot, or it's this question that you really want to explore. I think finding what lights you up is the most important thing.
Lisa, what about you? Do you have any tips for our writers to be?
The first obviously is read. You can't write unless you read. And I always tell kids when I do visits that it's like, you're funneling, like picture a giant funnel over your head. And when you're reading, your brain is so freaky cool that it picks up on things like character development and descriptions and things like that, and pacing and plot. And so it's like a funnel going to your head, so that when you sit down to write, it's like a fountain coming back out of you. Because if you don't have those things going in, you're not going to get them coming out. But I also share with them that I have this giant wooden button on my wall, and it's to remind me to keep my butt on the chair and write, because I think a lot of people want to be writers, but they are what another author friend and I call tourists, where you consider yourself a writer, but you never sit down and write. And you talk about writing, but you never sit down and write. And so if you're going to write, you got to get your butt on the chair and write.
Absolutely. It's just making it part of your routine and a habit, and then you'll actually start writing. I appreciate that advice. What about you, Jasmine?
Well, I think that was all great advice from Tay and Lisa. So I'm going to co-sign all that advice and then not repeat anything. I think the only thing I would add is that to believe and own yourself as a writer. I think for so long I used the modifier aspiring writer, but if you write, you're a writer. And I think it's really important. I actually returned to this now after being a published author now, to understand that the one thing I control is the writing, and I get to choose that. I get to choose, like Tay said, to have fun with it. I get to choose, like Lisa said, to sit down and actually do it, and sort of choosing yourself as a writer and feeling empowered by that. I think that I, for so long, was waiting for somebody to tap me on the shoulder and say, you're really a writer, or you actually are really good at this. And that moment hardly ever comes. And I think those moments are so ephemeral, like the external validation. And so learning to love it and love your craft and love that identity and sort of hold on to that, I think is really like important.
I love that too. Okay, I want to make sure we get to as many questions as possible, so I'm going to put two together. I'm going to have Lisa go first on this. So the first part is there a genre that you'd like to try that you haven't done yet? And is there any way that we can have a sneak peek on what you're working on now?
Um, there is a genre that I'm working on now. It will be an adult book, but it's very Black humor, like that dark British Black humor. You know, it's literally about death. I mean, and it cracks me up all the time when I start writing it. And I know that sounds so counterintuitive, but the characters woke me up one Saturday morning talking, and it was like, and they were just going back and forth at each other, and I was laughing my head off. And then I was like, but I didn't want to get up. Saturday's my sleep-in day. And so I was just like, yeah, okay, I'll write that later. And I felt like they were like going, get your butt out of bed, go write down what we've said. We're not going to repeat this again for you. And I went and wrote 70 pages because they were hilarious. And these characters, they're in my head right now. And but it's not me, first of all. It's just that I'm very English. Like my genealogy, my grandmother was from England, so I've got a lot of English in me. So I love British, that morbid humor, where it's like death humor, where you laugh at a funeral, kind of stuff. And so that was new to me, and I think it's actually gonna eventually be a play or screenplay. I don't know. It's just this weird thing that's happening, and it's writing itself, so I let it. My current work for my third book is about dementia. And I think my mother died of Alzheimer's. I took care of her for 15 years. And I think that so many people do not know anything about it, how it works, why they do what they do, the behaviors that they have, and how to meet them where they are, to help them live what life they have in the best way they can. And I know when I wrote Starfish, the second school visit I ever had, I was telling them about And Then Boom, and I was talking about this book. And they all wrote these, it was required that they all write an email saying whatever they wanted. Every single, there's over 500, said, please write the dementia book second, because grandma has it and I don't know what to do for her. My neighbor has it, I don't know what to do for them. And it's scary to me. And so that's what book 3 is about.
Thank you for sharing. I love the story about the characters waking up. I can't wait to read all about them.
They
Tay,
are.
what about you?
So Lisa's dementia book is gonna ruin me. I'm preparing myself. I guess for a genre that I would like to try, I would like to try graphic novel because kids ask me about it a lot and it seems hard, which means it would be fun, I think. As for the book that I'm currently working on, I can't say much about it, but it takes place in Seattle. And there is a few scenes in the Seattle Public Library, which is why it's my background right here. So that's been fun. It is hard as well. So I remind myself that means it's fun. But I'm excited about that one. It'll probably come out next fall.
I'm loving that it has some library rep in it. Appreciate your background. All right, Jasmine, let's have you wrap us up with this amazing conversation with what your thoughts and what you're working on are.
Yeah, so my genre that I've sort of always wanted to do is also related to what I'm working on. So I already shared that in my new book that comes out this fall, my favorite perspective in the book is the perspective of the turtle, Agatha. And I've always wanted to write like an animal story. I loved animals before the panel began. We were talking a little bit about my childhood love of animals, and that's carried me through. And I've loved reading books about all animals and animal perspective, but I never had like the right story. And then this past summer, I was really inspired. And I can't say too much about it except that it is an animal story. It's an animal friendship story. And it's sort of a story about found family and unexpected friendship. And I'm having so much fun working on it while also having it be a really big like creative challenge, which I'm gonna try to take the advice from this panel and tell myself that that means that it's fun as opposed to maddening. So that's what in theory will be the next book.
That is so exciting. I, again, love hearing about everything that you all are working on and just such a group of talented people and just brilliant minds. So hearing about your process and everything you're working on has just been such a pleasure. And this is wrapping up a lot of what we have today.
I just want to say thank you to Jasmine, Tay, Lisa, and Anna, and Penguin Random House, and HarperCollins for participating today. We learned so much. It was such a great conversation. Viewers, please join us again on Thursday afternoon for a similar conversation about YA titles, and then for a Learn to Draw panel next Tuesday. And I put details to register in the chat. So from all of us in the Children's and Teen Department of Baker and Taylor, happy summer reading. Thank you, everyone.